after his initial budget speech was postponed. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is set to deliver his budget speech later on this afternoon. The Government of National Unity Partners rejected the initial budget due to the proposed 2 percentage point increase in VAT. Let's now continue our coverage from Cape Town with my colleague, Michelle Craig, who's joining us live from Parliament. Once again, a very good morning to you, Michelle. Just on the back of that conversation that I just had with the former Statistician General, Paddy Lehutla, on the size of cabinet, he says that, listen, it's just something symbolic, considering that the size of cabinet, even if you were to cut it, you won't be able to plug that particular hole that government is trying to plug with the VAT. But this question about the bloated government has been there even before the Government of National Unity was established.
Eldrin, good morning to you and to our viewers once again. We started off at 6 o'clock with an 8-hour countdown to the tabling of the budget at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Here we are now, 7 hours to go. And it's about trimming the fat, isn't it? That's some of the slogans that we've been hearing about where do we get rid of those extra expenses that we have, and certainly the cabinet is one of those things. It's very interesting to hear you have that conversation with GNU member, the DA, and its leader, John Steenhuisen, in the wake of the first failed tabling of the budget. And he had a very different stance, didn't he, Eldrin, when he was answering that question about whether we should indeed be cutting the fat, so to speak, and trimming down our budget. Back in 2018, what the DA said was a completely different thing, sang a totally different tune. It was proposing that we cut the cabinet by more than 50%. So yeah, it's hundreds of millions of rand, isn't it, that we could save by getting rid of, for example, the deputy minister position, because there are directors general in departments, getting rid of particular ministers because those are political appointments. But these are the things that we need to do, isn't it, when we're running a government of national unity. So where do we find the money? The money that needs to be found to try and implement the social programs that government, social and other programs that government has in the pipeline. Of course, chief among those would be the SRD grant, which is what Enoch Godongwana was talking about when he proposed or was about to propose a 2% VAT hike. But let's bring in COSATU's parliamentary speaker here in Cape Town. Matthew Parks is joining us. Matthew, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much for coming on. What's your take on this issue of where do we trim the fat? Where do we get rid of these programs that are siphoning hundreds of millions of rand from our budgets every year? Surely one of the places to start. It might not plug all of the holes that we're thinking about, but it will save us hundreds of millions of rand.
Yeah, look, we think we need to find the right balance. Over years, government's been cutting frontline public services like home affairs, education, police, which really has an impact upon workers, health. And if you go to home affairs today, you'll see queues for days on end because there's a 60% vacancy rate. So there is a need to cut the fat on top. And if you want to tell society to tighten the belt, which is very difficult to do, it's a bit difficult to convince society when politicians live a very comfortable life, to put it politely. We think there is space. But also, look, we need to get the budget passed in the next, today needs to be tabled, passed in the next 2 weeks. We think there is a need for a thorough review over the next 6 months of all expenditure items to really see where is the fat, because we're not convinced when government says we have a shortage of 58 billion rand, that in a budget of 2 trillion rand, you can't find that. We think you can find it. There is a lot of wastage, and that could free up resources to invest in education and health and policing and social welfare, etc., the real priority areas. So we think there is really a need to do that, because often you find departments simply want to gatekeep to protect their territory, and at the expense of frontline services who really need the money. If you look at our defence force, look at our police service, look at our correctional services, they are buckling. And we really do need to see how to free up resources for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yesterday we saw the health ombud, I'm not sure if you saw that briefing, the health ombud and the health compliance office releasing a report into Helen Joseph Hospital. Infrastructure is crumbling there. There is a real dearth of care because of the lack of nurses. There's a 30% vacancy rate at Helen Joseph Hospital.
No, and that's partly why we've been opposed to these austerity budget cuts. Because you have one nurse performing the job of maybe 3 nurses. You have a 60% vacancy rate at home affairs. Yet we're surprised when there's long queues, when workers lose wages because they must queue at home affairs for days at a time.
Yeah.
We're seeing a rising teacher-to-learner ratio. We've seen a decline in the police headcount by 30,000 in the last decade. So we need to stop taking a shortcut approach. We need to invest in public services because workers benefit, businesses benefit, the economy grows. But there is a lot of wastage in the state. There is lots of corruption still, especially in places like Eskom and Transit and so forth. Municipalities are a crime scene. So we need to be a bit bold and brutal at times. But also there is also duplication in the state. You have a lot of these entities which just duplicate each other. You've got various entities dealing with traffic fines, for example. You could consolidate a lot of them. We also need to have a discussion about municipalities. Can we really afford 257 mayors, 257 municipal managers, when most municipalities are in severe financial distress? And perhaps we need to move towards a district development model. But we need to have these conversations while we have time to pick up the pieces, as opposed to waiting for the ship to implode, and then it's very difficult to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, 100 million rand here and there, surely that goes some way to plugging those holes, right? So the 2% VAT hike that we learned about through this leaked document of the budget speech that was meant to happen now almost a month ago, part of what the finance minister would have wanted to do with that VAT hike and the revenue collected there would be to fund the social relief of distress grant.
Well, I think the Treasury is being a little bit naughty to say that that is the intention. The SAD grant has been around since 2020. It's not a new item. And in fact, in the last 5 years, it's only been adjusted for inflation once. And even in that interim budget, or the now delayed budget, it wasn't adjusted for inflation. But look, it's a big impact item, 35 billion rand. It helps 8 million people to buy a loaf of bread a day. It's a valuable intervention for poverty relief and so on. We think there is ways to assist Treasury. We think, number one, let's give the South African Revenue Service more resources to improve tax compliance. It doesn't make sense to say let's have new taxes when we have 800 billion rand of taxes which are not being paid to the state. We can surely say to SARS, improve tax compliance by at least 1 to 2% a year, give them 2 billion rand to do that. That generates at least 20 to 40 billion rand of revenue owed to the state. That's more than what the VAT hike could possibly give us. We think there is space around some of the loopholes for the wealthy individuals, wealthy corporations, which you could reduce, give you a few billion rand as well. And to be honest, the state is under severe pressure. It can never address all of our issues. So surely we could have a discussion around the economic infrastructure projects. Engage the Development Bank, the Industrial Development Corporation, the Public Investment Corporation. Can they not take over some of these projects? They do that all the time.
Yeah.
They can ease the burden. Could the PIC, the UIF, the CETAs not take over some of the employment projects too? Because the state doesn't have enough money. There's only so much taxes you can raise. But if you can share the burden a bit across the state, we think we could assist Treasury in that regard.
I just want to ask you one more question, Matthew, as we run out of time. Yes, it was an unprecedented thing to have our budget tabling postponed, right? But isn't the point really more around the inner workings and the lack or dearth of leadership within the government of national unity? These partners surely must come up with a way of fighting their squabbles, yes, but doing so in a more mature way.
Look, I think it's a learning curve. The ANC has been used to being the only party. Treasury is used to being the king of the castle for years, and they barely even consult any ministers around the budget. And of course, the opposition parties have got to get used to moving from opposition, where you write angry statements, to being the complexities of government. They need to do so more elegantly, not so clumsily, but it's not a bad thing that the budget was delayed.
Yeah.
Just send a message to government. You can't continue on this business as usual approach. You can't inflict more pain upon workers who are drowning in debt. And it's a good thing that society now is engaged about the budget, because ultimately it's not a Treasury responsibility. This is for all of society. We need a budget which is progressive, which rebuilds the state, which stimulates the economy, which creates jobs. So I think for all of us, we need to say, how do we help make contributions to that solution? Yeah. And not just simply we lament and moan about life, but we don't offer real, tangible ways to rebuild the state.
Yeah. Some would argue democracy in action. And yeah, we should have a say, right? It's our rands and cents at the end of the day. Matthew Parks, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Matthew Parks is COSATU's Parliamentary Coordinator as we build up to Budget 2025. Will it be second time lucky? It's 6 hours, 45 minutes to go until Enoch Godongwana takes to the podium.